Good afternoon, everyone. We are thrilled to welcome you to the fourth edition of Epsilon. I'm Shalini, the Women in Engineering Head at IEEE SISGST.
And I am Kaivalya, the PR and Admin Head at IEEE SIES GST. Last year's Epsilon 2023 was a tremendous success filled with insightful discussions and groundbreaking ideas. And we are excited to carry that momentum into this year's edition.
Indeed, we are. Today, we kick off the fourth edition of Epsilon with our much anticipated theme Synergy of Realities. This afternoon session features an exciting webinar titled Neurobytes The Next Wave of Computing, presented under the Women in Engineering initiative. This session will shine a spotlight on the brilliant women driving innovation in neural networks and computing technologies. Get ready to dive deep into the world of neuromorphic computing and its role in shaping the future of technology.
And now, as we continue, let's shift our focus to this session under the WIE track Neurobyte The Next Wave in Computing. It's all about exploring the incredible future of computing through the lens of neural networks and their revolutionary potential. Sounds fascinating, doesn't it?
Absolutely. But before we begin, here's a quick note for all the attendees. Throughout the symposium, we've organized quizzes and tasks based on each session's content. Links to these quizzes will be shared in the comment box at the end of every session, and we encourage you all to participate. Every participant will receive a certificate, so don't miss out. Now, without further ado, let's welcome our first guest speaker for today's session.
We are honored to introduce Dr. Sayona Menezes Picado. She holds an PhD in electronics engineering and brings over 5 years of research experience in neuromorphic computing and nanotechnology. She has published extensively in top journals and is highly proficient with EDA tools like Cadence, Virtuoso, and MATLAB. From beginning her career as a lecturer at the prestigious Manipal Institute of Technology to serving as a program head at the International University of Bahrain, Mrs. Menezes has demonstrated expertise across research and development, program management, and technical training of cutting-edge technologies. Her leadership in cross-functional teams has driven significant technological advancements.
A warm welcome to you, Dr. Menezes. We are truly excited to have you here and can't wait for what promises to be a captivating session.
Thank you so much, Shalini and Harsh. That was a wonderful introduction, and I'm truly honored and excited myself to be here for this webinar on neuromorphic computing, a field that I've always been excited and intrigued about. So let's dive into it and see what neuromorphic computing actually is. So on the agenda today, I have a few topics lined up, which is to address and ask a basic question: what is neuromorphic computing? And then get into the basic components of neuromorphic systems, then move into applications. Where are they actually applied in the real world? What is its current state, and then future prospects in terms of technology, and how it will prove to be a promising and is proving to be a promising technology of the future. So two basic and very crucial questions. What is neuromorphic computing, and why is it important? Well, to answer the first question, neuromorphic computing is a field, is an upcoming and is an emerging field that is inspired from the electrophysiological behavior of the brain to design machines that can basically compute or process complex tasks at very low power. So basically, neuromorphic computing was coined by Carver Mead in about 1980s, and its basic principle was to emulate the behavior of the brain, so how the brain actually works, and translate that into circuits and systems and such that these circuit systems can perform just like how the brain does. And why this is so important is because brain works at a really low power, which is about 20 watts of power. And current computers, the traditional von Neumann architecture computers that we have today, work at significantly high power. And so in the 1900s, the late 90s, and the early 2000s, when the whole concept of neuromorphic computing came about and started getting developed very rapidly, it started to the concept behind the human brain and applying it into systems that can actually carry on machine learning tasks very efficiently became more and more of an exciting field. Because, and why is it important? Essentially, right now with the AI that's going about, all the machine learning applications that we have, and it's rising, it's growing, it's become very, we've come to a time where we cannot really do without AI and machine learning applications. So from healthcare to education to robotics, autonomous vehicles, and so on, AI is everywhere. And the real question is it really sustainable for the future? And the answer to that is no. That's because the current computers, the machine learning that is done with the use of traditional computers, the power consumption is really high. And going forward, this may not be the optimum solution to the demands of AI. And so neuromorphic computing is very promising in addressing those challenges in terms of power consumption as well as efficiency. And let's see how. So let's take a look at the basic architectures. So on the left, you can see the traditional von Neumann architecture, and on the right is the brain-inspired neuromorphic architecture. So as we know, traditional von Neumann architectures basically are sequentially processing. So the memory and the processing units are separated, and therefore this results in delays. And also the information is binary, so it's basically in ones and zeros. And therefore, due to this sequential processing, as in it has to happen in a sequence, and therefore there is a lot of power consumption due to this these aspects of the architecture. Additionally, it's synchronous, so it's clock driven basically. And in contrast to that, neuromorphic architecture is massively parallel. So what does that really mean is that the processing happens parallelly, and the memory and the processing units are not separated. We will see how in the upcoming slides. And so what it uses, the information is transmitted through spikes or something known as action potentials. So this is very different from how computers operate in today's day. And this is a significant difference because, as you can see in the two diagrams on the left and the right, the density in the output in traditional computers is a lot as compared to the sparse output in neuromorphic architecture. And that is because they are event driven. So what that essentially means is that when there is an event, and only when it is required to process information, it does, and therefore the output is as and when the event drives it. And so that is the main essential component of why these systems are very low power in their operations and also efficient. So how is neuromorphic computing placed in terms of an approach? So it is like, let's look at it from a bottom up approach. Pardon me. And so if we look at neuromorphic computing in terms of how it has been placed and evolved over the years and decades, is that first we have the materials at the bottom. So those materials, with those specific materials, the devices were designed. were manufactured, and with those devices, the circuits were designed. So now the circuits are divided into three parts. So basically, based on their inclination to the extent to which they are inspired by biology, they are divided into three segments, which is digital, analog, and mixed signal. So there are three types of designs these circuits can perform in. And then moving on to the architecture. So from the architecture end, there's like, from the circuits, we design the system architecture. And this essentially, these segments form the hardware aspects of neuromorphic computing. And then we have the software, which is the algorithms basically. And there are several algorithms that have been, that have come about through research in the last couple of decades. And those include reservoir computing, spike-based backpropagation, STDP. So STDP learning is spike timing depending plasticity, which is a method which is used in the brain actually. So that's how learning actually goes about in the brain. So that's been inspired from there. And when we have these software and hardware integrated, then we have applications based on what we need them for. We can integrate the hardware and the software for specific applications and regions of control, classification, benchmarking, understanding. A major part of the application goes into research of neuromorphic computing currently, apart from these that are listed. So having said that, is it really enough to just understand the hardware and the software aspects of neuromorphic computing without actually going back into where this all began, where it stems from? Not really. So it's really interesting, and it's really essential at the same time to understand how neuromorphic computing has come about. So this is basically from neuroscience, and there are three stages I'd like to focus upon in this slide. The first of which is what you can see. So basically, this is the biological neural model. Let me just pull out the laser pointer so I can explain to you. So it basically consists of this neuron. So this is a significant aspect or component of the brain. So the brain consists of network of neurons. So these neurons are connected with each other through a connection known as the synapse, as you can see here. Now, how is information transmitted? Information is transmitted through spikes. So we can see that this is a presynaptic neuron, which is a neuron that transmits the signal. And this is a neuron that receives the signal, and that's why it's called a postsynaptic neuron. And as we can see, the information is transmitted through spikes, input spike and an output spike, at a connection called a synapse. Now, with this basic idea and understanding, of course, the intricacies of how this information is transmitted through neuroscience, researchers developed several models called as neuron models. And some of them are listed here in this graph, which shows the complexity, basically the model complexity versus the inspiration from biology. So it's as wide as as in it's graphed from less to more, in the sense how biologically inspired it is and what is the actual complexity. So you can see several models here which are listed, and the area which is filled in actually signifies the amount of work that is in the literature, the applications that have been inspired from these models. And so we can see that some of the crucial models that have been used in the literature are McCulloch-Pitts family and integrated fire family, as well as Hodgkin and Huxley. So basically, Hodgkin and Huxley was one of the first models that ever came about in the 1950s. And this model actually was very comprehensive, and it encapsulated most of the electrophysiological behaviors and the intricacies of how the information is transmitted, accounting for the channels and the ion flow and all of those details basically. And that is why it is listed as the most complex of the models. Whereas this over here, integrate and fire family, so this has been one of the most used model because it kind of trades off between complexity and biological inspiration. And so this has been a model of choice for a lot of research work. And one of the popular models within this family is the leaky, integrate, and fire model. And so once these models were formulated and understood, then the next step was to design circuits and systems based on these models, which were done. And as you can see over here, it looks pretty much analogous to the biological neural system model. So what we have here are presynaptic neurons and the inputs, which are denoted over here. And then you have the synaptic connections, and then the postsynaptic neuron, where all these incoming signals, so to say, are summed and integrated, and then you get an output. So we look at it more closely as to how this comes about. So let's first very briefly look at the biological neural network, which is really interesting. And this actually gives us a clear understanding later on as to how neuromorphic computing actually brings all of these little details into the systems and how they operate. And so here we have this figure on top, which denotes a network of neurons. So if we consider this as a presynaptic neuron, which, as I mentioned, is a neuron that transmits the signal, and this a postsynaptic neuron, which is a neuron that receives the signal, it is connected together at this point, which is known as a synapse or the synaptic connection. Now, it's not a physical connection as such. It is here blown up to have a more comprehensive understanding as to how the synaptic connection actually looks like. And it's there's a gap, and this is called a synaptic cleft. And so all the magic of the information transfer actually happens here with certain chemical reactions that occur, which I will not go into details of here. But basically that will allow the signal to, it determines whether the signal is transmitted or whether it is inhibited. So this is what the synaptic connection actually does. And here we have the neuron. It's like a blown up image of a neuron. So basically these branches that you can see are called dendrites. And as you can see, there are like so many dendrites, and they can be connected to subsequent, like other neurons. And these dendrites are then connected to the soma, which is called, or the neuron cell. And there is an elongated branch here that is called an axon. So basically the axon is through where the signal is transmitted, and the dendrites are where the information of the signal is received from the presynaptic neuron. And then of course you have this axon then connected to subsequent neurons. And so how does a signal really look like? This electrical signal that we can see here, which is highlighted, actually looks something like this. So it's called an action potential, or it's also known as a spike, most commonly known as a spike. So there are certain dynamics over here that you can see in this action potential. So this is how it looks like. I mean, there are various regions of it, which actually is, there's a story behind each section of this and how this is generated within the human brain. And this is emulated in the systems into either digital spikes or spikes like this that you can see. So one thing I'd like to point out here is this blue line, which is called as a threshold. So every neuron has something known as a threshold point, or a threshold. So basically what that means is that when there is an incoming signal from a presynaptic neuron, if the signal is strong enough and it elevates the postsynaptic or the receiving neuron potential to a certain limit, which is known as a threshold, then that will result in a generation of a spike. So it reaches here, and then that generates a spike. So, and then of course, after it reaches a maximum value, it then decays down to its resting potential, or an equilibrium state, so to say. And this region right here that you can see is a dip below the resting potential. So this is known as a refractory period. And what is the role of a refractory period is actually when any other incoming spikes, if suppose there is a spike that's incoming at this point, it will not result in any increase in the potential. So essentially, this controls the spiking of the neuron. So any incoming potential or stimulus at this point will not result in any spike. So that's what this refractory period is all about. So just to briefly go into what happens in the neuron, because these are essential concepts that you will appreciate going forward. So here we can see a basic structure of a neuron, which consists of soma, actually. And that consists of a cell membrane, which you can see in orange. And here what you can see are ion channels. So each neuron or each cell has a cell membrane. They have ion channels which allow certain ions to flow in and out of the cell. Now, there are two important ions that are crucial in the in the generation of an action potential, and those are sodium and potassium. And there is a distribution of this inside and outside the cell, and also this membrane is permeable, so a leak can also occur between the outside and the inside through the membrane. So basically, why the reason why this potential here that we can see is on the negative edge is because the concentration of the potential or the ions within the cell is lesser than that outside. So the negative, and it's denoted by the potassium being bigger. So the concentration is higher of the potassium cells within the cell as compared to the sodium cells, and outside the concentration of the sodium cells, ions are more as compared to the potassium. So this difference in concentration gradient basically at the resting potential is why it starts at the negative. So basically what happens when there is a stimulation, suppose we consider this, there is a stimulation at this point from the presynaptic, and depending on the strength, how strong or weak that stimulus is, it will result in a slight increase or a significant increase in the potential of the neuron. So this is a postsynaptic, consider this as a postsynaptic neuron that we're looking at. And we're looking at the membrane potential. So when there is a stimulus here, it results in a slight increase. Now there's another neuron that is stimulating it at this point, and then it results in another increase. So this basically, an increase in the potential below the threshold value that we can see here is known as the excitatory postsynaptic potential, because it results in the increase in the potential. And so if we have subsequent increases, what tends to happen is at some point, at this threshold point, the sodium ions, the channel opens up and allows sudden inflow of these sodium ions, which results in the sudden spike. So this sudden surge or increase in the potential is due to the entry of the sodium ions into the cell. And once it reaches this maximum point, what tends to happen is these ions, the sodium ions, will close, and it will result in the opening of the potassium ions, and then the potential will drop to a level of resting potential. So that includes a refractory period. So we can see the details of that process over here on the diagram on the right here. So there are various terminologies for each phase of this generation of an action potential, which is listed here as depolarization, repolarization, and so on. So here there's an indication of a failed initiation as well. So in case there is a stimulation which is not high enough, then it doesn't result in a action potential. And if it is strong enough, or if there is a population of stimulations like over here, then it results in crossing the threshold and generation of an action potential. So let's have a look at how this really goes about. So stimulations can be of two types. One is the excitatory and the other one is inhibitory. So excitation means it results in the increase, and inhibition means it results in the decrease of potential. Now, these can happen simultaneously when there is, when a neuron is getting stimulation from other presynaptic neurons simultaneously, because as we mentioned before, in the brain, this happens. It's a massively parallel processing, and so things are happening very quickly and simultaneously. And so an indication of that is right over here on the right. So we have excitations and inhibitions. So these contest, and then that may result or may not result in an action potential. So in a neuromorphic system model, this is how we've already seen this before. And basically, that's how it is. So here, if we look at the synapses, this W0 to Wn, that signifies the weight. And the weight is analogous to the strength that we're talking about in biological neurons. So basically, if the weight is low, the strength is low. And likewise, if the weight is high, the strength is high. So that if the strengths are high or if the weights are high, then the probability of generating an action potential is higher. And so let's look at it with a real life example as to how this really goes about. And so I put together like a scenario. So we have here like a case of being hungry, and that results in an excitation. And when we're hungry, we want to have something. And usually we have something in mind. And when you present, like suppose we have a child who's hungry and thinking about, say, a chocolate smoothie, for instance, and you present the child with a glass of milk, that child is not going to be really excited with it, although he or she is hungry. So what tends to happen is with the sight of the milk, or you tell the child, so it's an auditory or a visual sensory. So if that's, if the child sees there's a glass of milk offered, there's an inhibition. So, she or he doesn't want to have it. And so that tends to drop the potential, the need to actually go ahead and have it. But then you mix it up a bit, and then you say, okay, well, let's do like an Oreo cookie with the milk. And then there's an excitation there at the site of the Oreo, but at the same time, we have an inhibition at the site of the milk, right? So that tends to again lower the action, the probability of the action potential being fired. And so in order to make that action potential a fire, what we need to offer is what is in the mind, what we desire really, or what we really want. And that is a chocolate smoothie or something of that sorts. And then if you say, okay, well, I'll offer you that, let's do that, and then that results in subsequent excitation enough to fire an action potential. And what this would actually result in is probably, the want to actually go and consume it. So you are stimulating several activities here at the same time, wanting to have it, actually going and having it, and so on. So there are lots of processes going on simultaneously. So with this in mind, with all of these biological processes, neuron models were developed, like I mentioned, and there are several, but I'll pick the easiest and most understandable, which is the leaky integrate and fire model. So basically, when it was understood as to how action potentials were actually fired, they resembled the RC circuit quite closely, because as we can see here and seen before, the increase in the potential looked somewhat like how the RC circuit response is. And also it makes sense because in the neuron you have ions and the whole concept of charges. So that said, that was translated into models, and this is what they came up with. And so we have a set of equations here. So basically, the input current, which is stimulus from the presynaptic neuron, and that was modeled into this equation here, wherein tau m is the RC, or the time constant, and U is the membrane potential, and this is U rest is the resting potential. And so we can see here below that if there is an input current, it will result in the increase of the membrane potential and the subsequent decrease in the membrane potential. And so with these different models, several circuits were developed. So I will get into the synaptic circuits first, and thereon move on to the neuron circuits. So this is some of the synapse circuits are what you can see. This is one of the simplest synaptic circuits that was developed, from which additions were made based on it being biologically more close to how the synaptic current is in the brain and how it is emulated. And so with the initial synaptic current that looks like this, which is a simple spike, to having more dynamics into it, and these were CMOS based. So basically that was in the early 2000s, and up until 2010, 2015. And then there came other designs for synapse circuits that included memristors, which you might have heard of. So there were other materials that came about because these synaptic circuits tend to make the circuit more dense, and so they wanted easier and more sustainable solutions to have these synapses in place, because within the whole network there are lots and lots of synapses, and having dense and bulky synaptic circuits really wouldn't be wouldn't result in an optimized design. And therefore there were other designs that came about. So here is a depiction of these memristor. It's arranged in a memristor crossbar. You have the presynaptic neuron and the postsynaptic neuron here. And coming to the neuron circuits, we have here on the left, this is an axon helix circuit. So this is one of the early neuron circuits that was designed. And it was designed very simplistic, and you can see the response here. The one in the red that you can see is actually the output spike that is generated. And the membrane potential here that we've talked about up until now is denoted in green. So as you can see, it doesn't really emulate all the dynamics of the real biological neurons. So it was very simple in its format. But thereon, a lot of research and design took place, which led to several other designs that were able to include a lot of these aspects of resting potential, refractive period, and the dynamics of the membrane potential. And that we can see in the second diagram here, which is the adaptation exponential neuron circuit. And here is the membrane potential that you can see, which is blown up. And as compared to the one that you can see here, it has evolved quite a bit, and it resembles the real membrane potential to a large extent. But that said, a lot of designs were CMOS based. There were mixed signal designs, and then there were digital designs that were able to, map well with the memristor synapse. And so in the early 2000s, a lot of research and development took place in this at the circuit level, wherein it really saw a lot of evolution in terms of complexity, in terms of applying different models to it, and the literature became really diverse in terms of neuron circuits and synaptic circuits. So having these circuits and based on the synapse and the neuron, how is this information actually being transmitted? So basically there are coding techniques which do that. And essentially in the brain, there are two types of coding techniques primarily. One that is rate coding, and the other one is temporal coding. So the rate coding basically focuses just on the population of the number of spikes that have been generated. And the temporal coding relies very heavily on the time that the spike has arrived or propagated. And so we can see a denotation of that over here in figure B, wherein you have an encoding period and the number of spikes actually matters. And here in temporal coding, there are different types in here. One is the time to first spike, which is here. So basically, it depends on when, the information that's encoded depends on when that spike has actually occurred. And then there is the ISI, which is the interspike interval, which depends on the distance between subsequent spikes. So here is an example just to understand how these coding techniques actually work. So let's have a look at this. There are images over here, and they span over their intensity. So basically, this is the least intensified image, and this is the most intense image, and it is scaled here on this graph. And as we can see, the first image on top is of the highest intensity. Now, here below, we have a representation of what that really looks like. Here we have a count rate, and this basically signifies all the images here. So if we refer to the one on top and each pixel, we can see that here it is densely populated. And here, where we are talking about the least intensified pixel, it is right about here. And so if we look at the count rate, this is at number 1 and this is number 7. And if you look at the time to first spike, we can see that here, this spikes first. So it denotes the intensity of that image, and here it spikes right at the very end. And that holds true for the interspike interval as well. So basically, the spacing between the subsequent spikes will determine whether that image is dark or light. And so coming to the neural network, so we've talked about the circuits, basically the synaptic circuit and the neuron circuits, and how the information is actually encoded and transmitted, and what does it look like when it's actually brought together. So when it's brought together, they form something known as neural networks. And this is a field that's not really new. We're aware of neural networks, artificial neural networks, which are used in traditional computations, in AI applications as of today. And they look something like this. So this is a very simple neural network, a feed-forward one. And here you have the inputs. So we have 3 inputs, and these circles are basically the neurons, and the arrows that you can see are the synaptic connections. So basically, these synaptic connections will hold something known as weights, which I've not really indicated here. But yeah, they hold weights, and depending on the weights, the subsequent layers of the neurons, the output is computed. So basically, this neural network has a hidden layer. So here I have denoted just 2 hidden layers, the input layer and the output layer. So it has to compute, and we have to get an output at the output layer. So basically, how it's done is that the incoming data is multiplied with the weights that we have, the matrices of the weights that we have, and then that is applied to an activation function. which can be sigmoidal function or ReLU function. And then that is computed, and the same thing repeats for subsequent layers to generate the output. So how that really propagates, or how that really goes about, is sequentially, right, in traditional computing. And just to note how that goes about, let's have a look here. So once you have the data in from the pre-synapse, so what do you have? It propagates to the next layer, computations are done, and based on that, the subsequent computations are done, and they're done all sequentially to get your output, right? But SNNs, which is spiking neural networks, work a little differently. And how that is there are two significantly different aspects to it. Basically, the first main one is the kind of data that it's fed with, and basically that is spikes. So here we have a set of spikes, and the connections are not arranged as we have seen it in the previous slides. So this is an arbitrary spiking neural network, and they can be recurrent in nature. So this is just a very basic example of that. And let's have a look at how the input spikes translate into an output spike, and how the information actually travels. So here is an animation which has been inspired by Dr. Schumann, actually. And I found it quite easy to understand. So let's have a look. So here in spiking neural networks, the one most crucial aspect is the timing. Timing is everything. And so spiking neural networks depend heavily on the temporal aspect of it. So going forward, let's see how this works. So you have the first set of input spikes that go into the neuron, and the lighting up of the neuron indicates that there might be a generation of a spike. So the processing is actually happening here. So we'll just consider a very simple example in which that we do take into account that a spike has occurred, and therefore the signal will travel like this. So as the spikes move in, this is how it propagates through the system. And you can see that it is not happening sequentially, and certain spikes are arriving at neurons at certain times. And that essentially depends on the distance between the neurons, or if I can put it in another way, the strength of between the two neurons. So if the strength is more, then the subsequent neurons tend to fire faster than when the strength is lesser. So let me just play that for you again, just so you can get an understanding of how that is. And as you can see, when we have the output, it's quite sparse. So we just have, for a set of input spikes, we have just 3 outputs that we have achieved. And that is basically what is event-driven. And that is why, essentially, why neuromorphic systems are very, very low power. So this is all about, we talked about the hardware and how the information is being transferred. We discussed about the traditional neural networks, and then the SNNs. Now, when we come to the algorithms that are actually implemented in neuromorphic computing, the software side of things, several algorithms have been developed over the years by researchers. And some of them are listed in this slide here. So the first one is spike-based backpropagation. So if you're into machine learning, you would know that backpropagation is a very crucial part of machine learning and error correction and so on. But translating that into spiking neural networks was a bit of a challenge, because the architecture is essentially different. And so this was not really as straightforward. mainly because of the threshold function, which is not differentiable, and that is basically incorporated into the activation function. And then there is a temporal processing, which is also difficult in terms of learning and training. So these two aspects were essentially didn't allow backpropagation to be incorporated into spiking neural networks as easily. So a spike-based quasi-backpropagation was developed. And then there are other algorithms which allowed training in traditional artificial neural networks, and then to kind of map it onto spiking neural networks. So that was actually realized in chips that were developed by IBM's True North and Intel's Loihi. So there's a Loihi 1 and there's a Loihi 2 that's come out now. And so these were essentially the techniques or algorithms implemented in these chips. And then there are other computing techniques like reservoir computing that we have here, and there have been applications like biosignal processing and also prosthetic control that have been achieved with this kind of computing. And then there is a spike time dependent plasticity. So this is a very important algorithm actually, because it emulates the learning mechanism from the brain. So this mainly depends on the relative timing between the presynaptic neuron and the firing and the postsynaptic firing. So these two spikes, the presynaptic spike and the postsynaptic spike, it depends heavily on the timing of it for learning. And so spike time dependent plasticity was something that the community really looked into in terms of application. And so having looked at these hardware and the software, when you integrate them, what do you get? You get several applications that neuromorphic computing is capable of. The first main is the scientific research, because that's where a maximum amount of time was spent, because it had to be understood. A lot of things had to be developed in terms of hardware, in terms of modeling, in terms of software, and a lot of cycles of iteration had to be also realized, because a lot of the software to be developed and viable on the hardware, there had to be an understanding between these two realms. It's not really isolated, and therefore a lot of the application was in the scientific research. And then of course there's high performance computing, from autonomous vehicles to data analytics and so on. So what you can see here on the top is the Loihi 1 chip, just to give you a sense of how big it is. And this is the IBM's True North. So these are the two chips that you can see. And then there is also an application of a drone that was developed by one of the startup companies. So that basically used an event-driven camera that you can see here for efficient, navigation of the drone. And that is these kind of cameras are also used in various other applications in the recent years. And then we have a robot that was developed again by one of the startups. And so neuromorphic computing basically is promising in all of these areas of applications, all of these areas that the current AI is looking into, that is very high power and is capable of doing the same thing more efficiently at a much lesser power. So some of the simpler and earlier applications I'd like to list out here are the classification that we can see here. And then there is the image recognition, basically which used these neuromorphic sensors and lenses. And then there was this object recognition, which was one of the earlier applications of neuromorphic computing. So The most recent of all is something known as the Haller point. If you are not familiar with it, it is the world's largest neuromorphic research system developed by Intel. And I'd like to play this just so you have a go at what it actually is. Today's market analysis, the only analysis we want time to and so this much interesting as an internal country. These trends highlight the role for unemployed approaches to reality. And it's not more exciting a hyper-efficient solution inspired by the called brains use near evidence that can solve complex problems and learning in real time. Unlike today's AI systems, brain applies responsible these brain-inspired networks have been implemented into this neuromorphic research chip. As we all know, we have considered massive cognitive gains, powerful performance over traditional processors. Now, to say enough of these gains, we developed a point research system with 1,000 subjects and 6 minutes. Our brain is massive cocaine with 20,000 tops. That's 20 operations per second. Research is evolving into advances in wide range of multi-application domains and scientific and problem solving to logistics and synapses infrastructure to monitoring and high agents capable of consultants alone. Our brains excellence in scaling up output capability versus I will now contact Carrie at patreon.com/neuromorphic. And so we have seen that neuromorphic computing is really promising, and it can address all the challenges of the current AI systems. And so let's have a look at what the current state and the future potential is. So basically, neuromorphic computing has developed and resulted in a lot of startups and a lot of companies that have invested heavily into the research and development of neuromorphic computing. So there are companies like IBM, Intel, BrainChip, who have developed chips in the neuromorphic computing arena. And then there are other startups that are dealing with event-based sensors like Innovision and Prophecy, Sony, etc. So, and SynSense as well. So, a lot of work and a lot of progress we can see in the neuromorphic computing field in today's day. And it has a really promising future because as of 2003, we can see that the market revenue was at 23.16 billion, which is expected to go up to like an 81.12 billion by 2031. And so in conclusion, what we have seen is neuromorphic computing is a significant breakthrough in AI and machine learning applications. And from what we have seen so far, we know that it is derived, and a lot of its inspiration is from the human brain. And so because our brains are so efficient and low power, this can be translated into systems, very sustainable systems of the future through neuromorphic computing and systems. And therefore, a lot of R&D and a lot of researchers around the world have invested time and effort into this field in order to have a sustainable future in terms of technology, in terms of machine learning, its applications into every field and area that we can think of. And so, the future of neuromorphic computing promises to redefine the boundaries of what's possible in technology, paving the way for more intuitive and responsive systems. Thank you for your time, and I had a great time myself presenting this.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for your enlightening session. And I hope that all the attendees have gained fascinating knowledge on your presentation. Now, let's transition to our interactive Q&A session. And if any of you have any questions, please feel free to post them in the comment box. We'll be reading them out.
So while the questions come in, I would just like to ask Shalini and Kev. So how, I mean, has the presentation sparked the interest in neuromorphic computing?
First of all, uh, the way you were explaining with the diagrams and how it goes from one neuron to the other, and the part where it joins is called a synapse. That was a very nice explanation, like from basic, and with the diagrams, it was really helpful, and you explained the circuits and everything. And for me, it was really nice because I didn't know like how neuromorphic computing actually works, like from the base, and seeing how it is actually linked with the brain was quite interesting for me.
I'm glad that you got that from, because it's we hear neuromorphic computing and researchers, and of course as students, when you are looking to get into the field, if you're into software, you will only look at the algorithms and the software aspects of it. And if you're into microelectronics, nanoelectronics, what the mindset is just to look into the circuit and system side of things. But you will have a feel and an appreciation for this field when you have a go at where it actually stemmed from, how neuroscience is, and understanding how the brain works. Of course, there's a lot that is still unknown about the way the brain works. But having said that, whatever has been deciphered by neuroscientists, that has been so very nicely and elegantly being translated into neuron models, and that has been then inspired researchers to design circuits, and sort of the journey has not been easy because there were so many hurdles along the way in terms of actually realizing these circuits, and that is still an ongoing process because essentially the hardware and the software are not really isolated, because if a software needs to work, if the algorithms need to work, it actually, the software engineers really need to look into how the hardware was developed, and a lot really depends on that. Unlike how sort of more easily the traditional algorithms can work on today's systems. So there are a lot many challenges. So when you are thinking of getting into this field, it really helps to kind of understand the intricacies of the action potential. What are the significant key points to take away from it? Like the timing is important, and the threshold is a very important factor in neuromorphic computing, and everything really depends on whether the threshold has been reached or not, and then the electrical signal is then generated. And also, of course, there is a lot that you can still explore, but with the time at hand, this is what I wanted to give an overview of how things have come along, and how it can be really appreciated at the circuit level and at the software level.
Yes, ma'am. And I think we have got quite a few questions in the comment box.
Yeah, so I can see one question from I'm sorry if I'm not pronouncing this right, Swim, SWYM. So, what challenges are there in using Neurobytes? So, I just kind of addressed a few of them. So, it's not, there are a lot of challenges because knowing the current artificial neural networks, it can be mapped onto the silicon neuron spiking neural networks, but it's not that much. It's not an easy process. So there have been a lot of difficulties because it has the timing, the temporal dynamics that it has to be taken into account, and then the threshold has to be considered. There are certain delays that are important, the axonal delays, the synaptic delays. Those are considerations that need to be taken into account, and therefore there are quite a few challenges in terms of realizing and getting a system out there which is commercially available that will actually has pieced everything together very, very nicely, and will be effective in real world applications. But I think the what you call research has come a really long way in the past couple of decades in actually getting some neuroprocessors out. And of course there are applications which use vision sensors, cameras and so on that are actually out there. So I can see another question here from Mahesh Vaishnav. So he's asking, what are the current gaps in neuromorphic computing? So the gaps are to kind of address these issues, like I just mentioned. And it's, the whole spectrum that I showed in one of the slides, the bottom-up approach, where it involves materials and then the devices, the circuits, and the architecture, and so on. So all that is still under research and development. And so, while this is being developed, there is, researchers are working on what is the best solution, what is the most optimum solution. That can be realized for various machine learning tasks or complex tasks. So there are certainly gaps, but it's not going to be too long until they will be filled, and we will actually see neuroprocessors really out there.
Any other questions that you would like to take up, or?
Yeah, there's one here that I can see. Can neuromorphic systems replace conventional AI systems, or do they complement them? Well, at the moment, it's the other way around. The conventional AI systems are actually complementing the SNNs because the already trained ANNs are actually being used to realize these SNNs. So that's the mapping that I talked about. But of course, that is the vision of neuromorphic computing. Can it replace conventional AI systems? So the drive and the vision is that, because it is much lower power, sustainable for the future, and also far more efficient than traditional computers. That's where it's aiming to go. So Shreyas is also asking, how scalable is neuromorphic computing technology? It is scalable, actually. So it can be like what you saw on the video of the Hala point. So the Lowy 2, the chip has been actually scaled. It takes research, of course, but it can be scaled and used to make processors, neuroprocessors, and right now that's not much of an issue as far as I'm concerned. So Tej is asking, what would you suggest for a beginner who wants to learn more about Neurobyte from scratch, I'm thinking. Okay, so what I would suggest, and I think this will be discussed during the panel discussion as well, is I'm sure this is a question that all of you are, or some of you who are interested in this area would be wondering about. So where do we actually begin? Where do we actually start? So the best route to go is first gather a good understanding of neuroscience and then go into some of the modeling aspects of it, just understand how the modeling basic models are actually formulated, and then depending on which area you want to target, either software or hardware, then you navigate into that aspect. So for me, essentially, I worked on hardware, so that is the route I took personally, because I wanted to understand how it really works in the brain, and what are the key important aspects of firing, spikes, and all of that. Even the ion channels, the ion flow. How does that really translate onto circuits? That's what I really wanted to understand and appreciate, and so I took that route personally. But this is what I would suggest. There's a lot of literature out there, especially, and there's like a dense volume of literature from the early 2000s up until now. So go for some of the really good textbooks. I can suggest, if I can connect with you, I can email them to you, or probably Shalini can facilitate that. I can give you a few books that I enjoyed reading, and also the top journals in neuromorphic computing. Just target some of the best journals and articles, and read from it. So there are different communities around the world who are actively involved, or involved in the research. There is a community in the States, Australia, Zurich, and so you can follow them, and you can learn more about it. And also you can join communities on LinkedIn. There's a lot of content out there which can help you to educate yourself on basic things to more advanced aspects of neuromorphic computing. So
So,
anything else that I can answer?
or they can contact you
Sure, they
through.
can. I'd like to take one more question because this is an interesting one. This is from Abira Khan. So she's asking, how can academic institutions better support the study of neuromorphic computing to meet the demands of future industries? So this is very interesting because I think in India specifically, you don't have it really in the curriculum. So a lot of research that has happened in India, in my view, is there are PhD studies and all of that. That, I mean, we didn't take these courses up at the undergraduate level, at the postgraduate level, but globally there are a lot of universities out there that have you know neuromorphic computing built into their curriculum. So if you are considering to take it up as your future career, go into whichever way that you want to navigate into, either hardware or software, then you might want to look into the colleges that really offer the courses, so you're well equipped and you have a strong foundation to move into a research area, a specific research area.
So I think that we can wrap up our Q&A session now. And for further questions, then they can contact you directly if they want to, and otherwise I can share the references, whatever you send me. And yeah, so that will wrap up our Q&A session, and we really do appreciate you very much, ma'am, and we would like to extend our token of appreciation.
Thank you so much, Shalini and Harsh, and I'm honored to be here. And I absolutely enjoyed myself. I'm sorry, Cavalier.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, I'm sorry for that. So yeah, I had a great time, and I hope you really got to understand and appreciate certain aspects of neuromorphic computing. And yeah, it's a technology of the future, and you know read about it and get to know more about it as you go. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
And on behalf of the entire team, thank you once again for your valuable insights. And to our wonderful participants, thank you for joining us today and for your enthusiastic engagement. And that's it.
Now, everyone, we have posted the link of the quiz in chat box. You have 10 minutes to complete the quiz. Your timer starts now.
So we are hoping that you all will finish the quiz. And we have also posted the feedback link in the comment section. So do let us know your opinion on today's session. And just a quick reminder that tomorrow's hands-on session will build on everything you have learned today. So we are excited to see you there. Best of luck with the quizzes, and we look forward to seeing you all tomorrow.